Everyone, Alodar here. Today's video is one that I'm making because of a conversation that we had on my live stream last night, and it was basically a discussion about which route Amazon should take when they look to balance weapons. Now, as a developer, there are many things they might want to consider. I'm going to start off with this video by saying that I tried many of the weapons in the beta, and while some felt absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure many of you can agree, others felt kind of dull and boring. Now, in order to get this conversation going, I'm just going to jump right to it, and I'm going to make a suggestion here that is probably going to be fairly contentious or controversial to other people that are watching the video. I am hoping, though, that you'll watch the whole video, and at the end of the video, you can let me know one of two things, or both. Did you agree with me, or possibly even change your mind after you watch the video? And the second one would be, what weapons do you think are not performing as well as others? Now, we all know which weapons a lot of people are talking about that are overperforming or performing better than other weapons. And you could be looking at weapons like Life Staff or Great Axe, possibly Hatchet, maybe one or two other weapons that I'm missing. And there's other weapons that are just not performing nearly as well, or they're just not nearly as fun to play. So my suggestion for Amazon is that when they're looking to balance the weapons, they leave weapons like Life Staff, Great Axe, Hatchet, the ones that we think are overperforming, and just basically leave them alone. Now, I'm not talking about bugs that are associated with weapon. For example, like Great Axe has a bug that allows it to hit twice. I'm not talking about things like that. I'm talking their baseline damage or healing. Leave them alone. I think they're working fine, and a lot of people are having fun. What I think that we need to do is look at the other weapons, and I'm hoping that once you've watched the entire video, I think you'll see where I'm coming from. Now, if it isn't obvious already, I've been playing MMOs since basically the beginning of time. Maybe not seriously that long, but since 1997 with Ultima Online, and I've gone through more patches and buffs and nerfs than most, and I can say one thing with absolute certainty. Nerfing weapons is not always the best answer, and let me explain. Now, as I said previously, right now you have players with a handful of weapons that feel great about their weapons, and others that basically feel like they're just not performing at the same level, and it's not as fun. You have individuals with a Life Staff, 200 Axe, and perhaps a couple of others that feel great. Now, when I'm talking about leaving weapons alone, like I said before, I'm not talking about bugs like the 200 Axe hitting twice. Fixing that is not a nerf in my opinion, that's just an unintentional bug that should be removed. But other than these types of bugs, I think the baseline damage and healing in it is fine. These weapons are a lot of fun and it's exciting to use them. I think when we have some players who are playing weapons that are just not fun or playing up to the same potential as other weapons, many people's natural reaction is to immediately yell out and call out for nerfs, when instead I think in many such cases that we should be looking to do the exact opposite and buff the underperforming weapons so those players feel great about their weapon as well. Now, one of the major issues that developers face is that when they just nerf weapons, they always leave a group of players that are extremely disappointed. So the approach that I think Amazon should make instead would be to buff other weapons that need it. We just have to kind of keep in mind that buffing weapons doesn't necessarily mean that all weapons are going to be equal all the time. Then the game would just kind of get boring. There should always be weapons that have different strengths and weaknesses. Some weapons have better crowd control, other weapons have great buffs such as haste, and others are focused on single target DPS while others do great AoE or possibly healing. And I know that both you and the developers already know this. What I am wishing happens is that developers take a look at the underperforming weapons and give them a buff so that those players feel just as great about their weapons as other players do about theirs. Rather than bring the strong weapons down the same common boring denominator, I want them to take the underperforming weapons and raise them up so those players feel just as good about their weapons as others do about theirs. This will do two things. Number one, this would lead to a large group of players being happier rather than everyone being kind of somewhat disinterested or unenthusiastic. And two, this would lead to much more diversity among players as there are a large variety of weapons to be excited about. You'll see much more enthusiasm among players to try a wide variety of weapons rather than everyone just running around with what's the current meta. Earlier in the video, I said that now is, in my opinion, the best time to apply these buffs, and the reason I think that it's important to make these increases now is because of how it affects other aspects of the game, such as PvE and PvP, as well as a term that is called power creep, which occurs in games, and I'll talk about that later, so make sure that you stick around. By giving buffs to a number of weapons, this is going to increase players' damage output, so in PvE, it's best to make the adjustments to bosses before launch. Adjusting the boss's armor, health, damage, and CC abilities could all be made to offset the buffs to weapons to keep the encounters challenging. And let's be honest, based on players' experiences in beta, the bosses could use some tuning to make the encounters tougher anyways. In PvP, the additional damage helps speed up fights and makes them far more exciting. There are currently battles over territory that are boring to watch or even participate in. It's basically tanks versus tanks, and you get into situations where people are just really not taking any damage, even when they're not even getting healed. It's basically a standoff and nobody is dying and nothing really exciting is happening. By increasing damage to other weapons, this helps change all that. Instead of having what feels to be a long, boring 50-minute dampening match in World of Warcraft arenas, but in this case where everyone's just swinging AoE weapons like axes and hammers, you would have other weapons that would shine as exciting plays such as target swapping occur to burst down single targets and make for much more fun, entertaining matches. Now at the beginning of this video I said that I believe that life staff should be left alone, so let me explain. One of the reasons that life staff is so powerful is that so many weapons are just simply underperforming. By increasing damage to those underperforming weapons, this in a sense gives a nerf to life staff as their heals are suddenly having a much more difficult time healing through that damage, particularly since some weapons will be much more effective at bursting down targets with the additional buffs. This also holds true in PvE. As players do more damage and developers are forced to increase bosses' armor and damage output, this puts extra strain on the healers. With the boss doing more damage and more CC, the healers will have a much more difficult time at keeping the other players up. The increase to the boss fight should be enough so that it can cause some very iffy situations for the group to be able to heal through. We also mentioned the term power creep a bit earlier in this video, and no, we're not talking about former employees of Blizzard. Many of you may have heard this term before, however, if you haven't, power creep is a term used for when new powers or buffs enter a game, making other powers, abilities, or in this case weapons, useless. This can then become a pattern where abilities or weapons just become more and more powerful and make the content less challenging. This can happen in a variety of games and is something that the developers need to be wary of, and the reason why now is the best time to make these weapon buff adjustments. There's a huge amount of excitement around this game. It's been a long time since I played an upcoming MMO with so much excitement around it, and I want to keep that level of excitement for all players. And one way to maintain that level of excitement is to buff certain weapons that are currently underperforming, so that those players are just as excited about their weapons as other players are about their weapons that are already performing at a good level. I think that New World is on a roll right now, and being a Debbie Downer and nerfing weapons at this time to bring strong weapons down to the same boring performance level of other weapons is not the correct tactics that should be used at this particular time. Hopefully buffs will be announced and everybody's level of excitement can be at an all-time high for launch in late September. I will also leave this video with one remaining thought. I do think that there needs to be one more short beta, maybe just for a weekend or something like that, not only to test these adjustments, but also to help stress test the servers one more time. Anyways, that's it for this video. Please make sure that you comment below and let me know which weapons you think that need buffs, and what kind of buffs would you give them. I would also greatly appreciate a like if you enjoyed the content, and subscribe to see many more videos on New World in the future. Bye for now.